The moment I knew my best friend had gone too far was when I came home and found a lock on my bedroom door. It wasn't my lock, and the key was in his pocket. His name was Ryan, and we had been friends since high school. We had survived bad jobs, terrible relationships, and years when neither of us had much money. So when his landlord ended his lease and Ryan said he needed somewhere to stay, I didn't hesitate. I owned a small two-bedroom house that my aunt had sold to me at a price I could manage. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I had spent years fixing it up. Ryan asked if he could stay for 6 weeks while he searched for another apartment. I told him he could use the spare bedroom and contribute a little toward groceries. I didn't even ask him for rent. At first, having him there was great. We cooked together, watched movies after work, and joked about feeling like roommates again. He cleaned up after himself and kept thanking me for helping him. For the first 2 weeks, nothing felt strange. Then I came home one evening and noticed my couch had been moved. Ryan had pushed it against a different wall and moved the television to the other side of the living room. When I asked why, he said the original layout was awkward. I told him I preferred it the way it had been. He shrugged and said, "Just try it for a few days, you'll see." It annoyed me, but moving furniture wasn't worth an argument. I left it alone. That small decision made everything that followed much easier for him. A few days later, I opened a kitchen cabinet and found all my plates on a different shelf. Then my coffee machine disappeared from the counter. Ryan had put it inside a lower cabinet because he thought it made the kitchen look cluttered. I reminded him that it was my house, and I used that machine every morning. He laughed and said I was being defensive over nothing. That was the first time he made me feel uncomfortable inside my own home. Still, I tried to be patient. Ryan was under pressure. He had recently lost his apartment, his relationship had ended, and his work hours had been reduced. I thought controlling small things helped him feel stable. But then he started inviting people over. The first time I arrived home on a Friday night and saw 3 cars outside. Ryan had invited several coworkers to watch a game. Nobody had asked me. People were eating food from my refrigerator. Drinks were sitting on the wooden table I had refinished myself. A man I had never met was lying across my couch with his shoes on. Ryan looked at me and said, "You're home early." Not, "Sorry, I should have asked." Not, "Is this okay?" Just surprised that I had returned to my own house. I pulled him aside and told him guests were fine, but he needed to speak to me first. He rolled his eyes. Then he said something that stayed with me. "You don't need to supervise everything that happens here." I stared at him. I wasn't supervising him. I was asking for basic respect. He eventually told everyone to leave, but he acted cold toward me for the rest of the weekend. And that was when the mood inside the house began to change. Ryan stopped talking about apartment listings. Whenever I asked how the search was going, he said everything was too expensive or too far from work. 6 weeks became 2 months. Then 2 months became 3. He still wasn't paying rent. His grocery contributions had also stopped. Meanwhile, packages began arriving with his name on them. New speakers, kitchen equipment, framed prints for the walls. One afternoon, I found him drilling into the living room wall to hang a large picture. I told him to stop. He became irritated and asked why every minor change required my approval. I said, "Because you're staying here temporarily." His expression changed. He looked at me for a few seconds and said, "I thought this felt more equal than that." That sentence confused me. There was nothing equal about the arrangement. I paid the mortgage, taxes, insurance, utilities, and repairs. Ryan occasionally bought milk, but he had started describing the house as our place when he spoke to other people. At first, I thought it was casual wording. Then one Saturday morning, a woman knocked on the door. She introduced herself as Melissa and said she was there to look at the spare room. I had no idea what she meant. Ryan appeared behind me and quickly pulled her outside. When he came back, I asked him what was happening. He said Melissa was a co-worker who needed somewhere cheap to stay. He thought she might use the spare room for a few months. The spare room was his room. His plan was to move into my larger bedroom and give Melissa the smaller one. He had arranged all of this without speaking to me. I asked him why he thought he could offer rooms in my house to strangers. He said Melissa would pay rent, which would help us with expenses. There was that word again, us. I told him there was no us when it came to ownership. He was my guest, and the original 6-week arrangement had already stretched far beyond what we discussed. Ryan became angry. He said he had invested time in the house. He had cleaned the backyard, repaired a cabinet hinge, and helped paint the hallway. According to him, those things gave him a stake in the place. I reminded him that he had lived there without rent for 3 months. He walked away and slammed the spare room door. I should have ended the arrangement that day. Instead, I gave him 2 weeks to find somewhere else. That was when his behavior became harder to understand. He started treating me like an unwanted roommate. He filled the refrigerator with his food and moved mine into one drawer. He kept the thermostat much colder, even after I changed it back. He played music late at night and complained whenever I asked him to lower it. Then he began making comments about my schedule. If I came home late, he wanted to know where I had been. If I invited my sister over, he acted annoyed that I hadn't informed him. It felt as if he was trying to make me so uncomfortable that I would stop challenging him. But the most disturbing part was still ahead. One evening, 4 days before he was supposed to leave, I got home from work and found my bedroom door closed. I tried the handle. It wouldn't move. There was a new lock installed above it. I called Ryan's name, but he wasn't home. I stood in the hallway staring at that lock, feeling anger rise through my chest. My clothes, work documents, medication, and personal belongings were inside. I called him. He answered after the third attempt and casually explained that he had moved his things into my bedroom. He said the spare room was too small and he needed more space while he figured out his next move. I asked where my belongings were. He said he had placed most of them in boxes in the garage. Then he told me not to touch anything until he came home. That was the moment the entire situation became clear. Ryan wasn't confused about boundaries. He wasn't just stressed. He knew I avoided confrontation, and he had been testing how much I would accept. Every move plate, every uninvited guest, and every decision made without me had been another test. The lock was simply the first thing I could no longer explain away. I called a locksmith and showed him my identification and property documents. He removed the lock and replaced it with one that only I could open. Then I carried every item Ryan owned into the spare room. When he returned, he exploded. He accused me of invading his privacy. I asked him to repeat that while standing inside my bedroom. He said he had tenant rights and I couldn't throw him out. That worried me because I didn't know the local rules. So I didn't remove him that night. Instead, I gave him written notice and contacted a housing attorney the next morning. That conversation revealed the final part of Ryan's plan. He had been receiving mail at my address for months. He had also transferred one of his accounts there and listed my house as his permanent residence. The attorney explained that Ryan might try to use those records to delay leaving. Suddenly, the packages and constant excuses made sense. He hadn't failed to find an apartment. He had stopped looking. Ryan had turned my help into a housing strategy. Once he realized I had legal advice, his attitude shifted. He became quiet and tried to repair the friendship. He said he had been going through a difficult period. He claimed the house had started feeling like home, and he had become too comfortable. But comfort didn't explain offering my room to another person. It didn't explain the mail changes, and it didn't explain locking me away from my own belongings. I told him the friendship was over and that every future conversation needed to be about his move-out date. For the next 3 weeks, the house felt tense and cold. We barely spoke. He tried delaying twice, but the written notice made the deadline clear. On the final morning, his brother arrived with a rented van. Ryan carried his boxes outside without looking at me. Before leaving, he stood by the door and said I was choosing a house over years of friendship. I told him he had made that choice when he decided my kindness was something he could take control of. After he left, I changed every exterior lock. I moved the furniture back. I returned my plates to their old shelf and placed my coffee machine on the counter. Those small actions affected me more than I expected. For months, I had allowed someone else's anger to control how I lived in the home I worked to afford. Ryan sent a few messages later. First angry ones, then softer ones. I never responded. Mutual friends heard different versions of what happened, but I stopped defending myself. The people closest to me had seen enough during those months. I used to think losing a longtime friend required one huge betrayal. Sometimes it happens through dozens of small violations that you keep excusing because of the history you share. Ryan entered my house asking for 6 weeks of help. He left months later after teaching me that a person who resents your boundaries was benefiting from your lack of them. I didn't choose my house over my best friend. I chose myself after he made me feel like a stranger in my own home.